Let's look at some more defensive tactics in FTL. Again, I'm using the Combat Sims mod, and in this episode I want to look at situations where manning your shields can prevent damage. Of course, there are some general situations such as asteroid fields or when enemies have combat drones where manning your shields can be useful, but I want to look at specific enemy weapons here. In this case we have a heavy laser 1 and a mini beam. This fires at 9 seconds, this fires at 12, so there is a 3-second gap between them. However, it takes the heavy laser about 1 second to reach your shield, so that gap is effectively reduced to about 2 seconds. And 2 seconds is exactly how long it takes your shield to recharge. So in most cases here, about 78% of the time in my quick testing, we're going to take 1 damage. The shield does pop back up before the mini beam can do any more damage. And what we can do instead is simply put a crew member in the shields room. And that improves our shield recharge by 10%, so it takes 1.8 seconds to recharge instead of 2. And this will prevent damage in almost all cases. I believe there are very rare occasions where the heavy laser might come in at a bad angle. Probably not on this ship, maybe on something like the Kestrel A. Now the other thing to note here is that these weapons will be firing at the same time at the 36-second mark, because that's 9 times 4 and 12 times 3. So that was the 4th heavy laser, and now on the 5th heavy laser they have a chance to do damage, except they won't because we're manning shields. So manning shields is relevant on the 1st volley of the heavy laser and the 5th volley and the 9th volley and so on. Now in this case the enemy is manning their weapons, and that means we are going to take damage anyway, or at least that happened 100% of the time in my tests with the NGA specifically. However, notice that the shield pops back up before the mini beam can do more than 1 damage. However, if we don't man shields, then there is a chance that we take 2 damage instead of 1. In my tests with the NGA, there was a 54% chance of taking 1 damage and a 46% chance of taking 2 damage. So in this case we only took 1 damage, but here's another example. And there you see we took 2 damage. So if we had been manning shields, that would have been reduced to 1 damage instead. In this example we have a basic laser and a heavy laser. This fires at 9 and this fires at 10 seconds. So we can't do anything to help the first volley. They're only separated by 1 second. But we can on the second volley. If I'm not manning shields, then there's approximately a 1 in 3 chance that we will avoid damage anyway. But you can see in this case it got inside the shield barrier before it came back up. On the second volley of these weapons, they are separated by exactly 2 seconds. The gap between them increases by 1 second every time they fire. And that's exactly the same amount of time it takes our shield to recharge. So what we can do is simply man shields, and on this ship in particular, guarantee taking no damage from the second volley. The shield will always be up exactly in time, and that's because this shield is perfectly circular. I also tested this with the Slug A, and I found that had a 92% success rate. If the enemy is manning their weapons, then that high success rate is dropped to about 40%. So it's much less likely that this trick will work. However, if you don't man shields, then you're definitely not going to get the shield back up in time. So this can still work, because it depends on the angle that these weapons come in at. If the heavy laser comes in at a very direct angle and the basic laser comes in at a more oblique angle, then our shield might just be up in time. It's very close. The 10% manning bonus on the shields exactly offsets the 10% manning bonus on the weapons. And this time it didn't work out. But here's another example. We are on the second volley, and you see the shield is just back up in time. Here's another example with a heavy laser 2 and a Pike beam. This fires at 13 seconds and this fires at 16, so there is a 3-second gap between them. Again, just like the first example, that is reduced to a 2-second gap because of the time it takes for the heavy laser to reach your ship. And if we're not manning our shields, we're going to take damage, assuming you don't dodge something. The amount of damage you take can vary. In my testing with the Kestrel, it was 1 damage 68% of the time, 2 damage 28% of the time, and very occasionally, just 4% of the time, 3 damage. If instead you man your shields with a fully trained crew member, then you are guaranteed not to take any damage. And this is something you could reasonably have because you've already got 2 shields. You may have had an opportunity to train your crew. People often say that shields manning doesn't matter that much, and it's true in many situations, but here's an example where having this training does actually help. Incidentally, if you don't have the training, you can still man shields with an untrained crew member, and that gives you a 50-50 chance of taking 0 damage or 1 damage. You will never take 2 or 3 damage. At least that's what happened in my tests with the Kestrel cruiser. It may vary a bit depending on the ship. Now, if the enemy is manning their weapons, you're not guaranteed to avoid damage, but you have an 88% chance of taking 0 damage, provided you have fully trained shields crew. And if you do take damage, it's only going to be 1 damage. Now you can see we avoided damage. If you do not have any crew manning shields, then you're typically going to be taking 2 damage, unless of course you dodge one of the shots. And that's all the shield manning tips I have for you. But look out for other opportunities in the game where enemy weapons are separated by about 2 seconds. Manning your shields can sometimes make the difference. It's even sometimes worth keeping track of enemy weapon timings across multiple volleys, and that could apply to some of these other tips as well, like ion dodging. That's all of the combat sims based tutorials that I have, but in the next episode we'll look at something different.